Hello and welcome to another webinar in our leadership series. Today's webinar is Leading Change. My name is Dr. Donald Chick and I am President and CEO of New Synergist Consulting. We provide a variety of products and services including leadership development, strategy planning and support, diversity, equity and inclusion, and coaching services. We also utilize various assessments and analytics to support those products and services. And we also provide assessments and data analytics support as standalone options if appropriate. The objectives for today's workshop are as follows. We want to list the steps necessary for preparing a change strategy and building support for the change. We want to describe with them the individual motivators for change. What's in it for me? We want to be able to use needed components to develop a change management and communication plan and to list implementation strategies. We want to employ strategies for gathering data, addressing concerns and issues, evaluating options, and adapting a change direction. We want to utilize methods for leading change project status meetings, celebrating successful change implementation, and sharing results and benefits. We also want to describe the 4 states of appreciative inquiry and its purposes. We want to use strategies for aligning people with a change, appealing to emotions and facts. We want to describe the importance of resiliency in the context of change and employ strategies the change leader and individual change participant can use to foster resiliency. And finally, we want to explain the importance of flexibility in the context of change and demonstrate methods the change leader and individual change participant can use to promote flexibility. So let's get started. But first, let's talk about the importance of leading change. Research has shown that as much as 70% of change efforts fail. That means many organizations are spending lots of money and time on efforts that will not result in improved performance or improved productivity. That means they're also falling behind in terms of being competitive in the market. A market that is becoming more and more global, more and more competitive, and of course, ever changing. We also know, based on research, that hard skills, in many cases, are less important than soft skills. And some of the components that lead to improved processes and improvements in change efforts include top leadership support, communications, understanding the needs and desires of employees and other stakeholders. So we're going to talk about some of the tools and tips needed to create a successful change plan, and then of course successfully implementing that plan in order to support improved performance in your organization. In this next section of our webinar, we'll talk about how to prepare for a change, a big change, a complex change. And while it's probably been 100 years or so since we started talking about individual change, it's really been only since the mid-1980s that we started to really think about change on an organizational basis. So we're going to start talking about some of the components and process that are needed to prepare for a successful change effort. When defining our strategy, we want to divide the questions that we need to ask into 3 major areas. The first area is the situation. So some questions that we want to ask ourselves. What's being changed? How much perceived need for the change exists? What groups, what people will be impacted? How long will the change take? The second aspect is people and their roles. Who will serve as the high-level sponsor of this change? What functional groups should be represented in order to lead this effort? And finally, issues for analysis. What will happen if we do this? What will happen if we don't do this? How universal is the change? And are there exceptions or deviations that we should consider? I think in most cases, defining your strategy is intuitive. Leaders understand that. But I've seen in some cases where they don't really do a good job of defining their strategy so everybody understands it and all stakeholders are aligned with that strategy. Some people don't understand what their roles or responsibilities are. Some parts of the organization don't understand what their roles and responsibilities are. And then finally, they have no idea in many cases what issues need to be analyzed, at least in whole. So some issues that should be analyzed before proceeding don't happen, and therefore almost dooming that change effort to failure. When we consider how to build our team in order to make this change effort work, we have to consider several factors. We want to effectively implement a team and position it for success with leaders who are selecting members who display a high degree of skill in 6 key elements: commitment, contribution, communication, cooperation, conflict management, and connection. This team must represent all of the needed functional groups and roles necessary to manage the change initiative. By formalizing the team and providing funding and other resources, we can send a message of accountability and responsibility, and illustrate the investment the organization has made in order to support this change. In order for any successful change effort to occur, we need stakeholders, and particularly employees, to be involved. And part of that involvement is making certain that they are aware of why we're making this change and what might happen if we don't make the change. Awareness is not enough. We need to deal with issues around resistance or fear or uncertainty while we're answering the question, what's in it for me? And part of doing that is not simply awareness, but also making sure employees are motivated, have a desire to support any change effort, and make sure it's successful. And that's what we'll talk about in this next section of our webinar. A key concern in any proposed change effort is resistance. In order to answer the question, what's in it for me, or with them, change management leadership must create energy and engagement around the change. This builds momentum and instills support at all levels of the organization. Some factors that influence with them are the nature of the change, the organizational context for the change, an employee's personal situation, and what motivates the person as an individual. Remember, when we talk about what's in it for me, it's important to understand that it's not enough just to assume that because your employees are getting a paycheck, that they automatically understand why you're making a change. Change almost always creates resistance. And a big part of eliminating or at least mitigating that resistance is making sure all employees and all parts of your organization understand the answer to the question, what's in it for me? Part of successful change is creating and building support for that change. Effective communications are essential for building support throughout the organization. Whoever communicates with people impacted by a change must have a clear understanding of the overall nature of the change, its reasons, and how it aligns with the vision of the organization. He or she must understand the risks of not changing, the timing for the change, and what people will be most impacted by the change. There are many communication options, including email, presentations, posting on the organization's intranet, flyers and circulars, banners, online or phone conferences, and special social events. Beforehand, communicators should identify and segment audience groups, craft messages appropriate for each audience, and determine the most effective packaging, timing, and methods for communicating. Executive sponsorship, coaching by managers and supervisors, ready access to business information are all part of the communication package and process. An important aspect of any change effort, in addition to what's in it for me, why should I do this, is to make sure employees and other stakeholders at all levels of the organization understand change and why it needs to occur. We're going to talk about how to make sure that understanding is created throughout the organization in this next section of our webinar. Typically, causes of change can be split into two categories, internal and external. We have to remember that no organization is an island, and external forces are always influencing and interacting with its existence. Individuals and organizations may have very little ability to influence such external factors, politics, culture, the economy, societal changes, or technology. It's important to understand that if the change is the result of an external factor, we should accept the change and then modify internal processes or items that are affected by the external influence. Internal factors are very numerous, as almost any item or event can influence change within an organization. But some of the more influential ones include employees, policies, instructions, other types of guidance, organization structure, managerial aspects, as well as financial planning. With internal causes of change, we have the most ability to control and prepare the outcomes of such events. The benefits of this are numerous, as we can prepare with education, communication, training, and support. These tools will help mitigate any negative outcomes which may occur as a result of the change. With all the changes that are occurring externally to organizations, I hope no leader assumes they don't need to change. Even those leaders whose organizations are at or near the top of the competitive ladder. Remember this. If your strategy and your organizational design and your products and services are at or near the top of your industry, will they be that way tomorrow if you aren't willing and able to make changes as appropriate? Individuals impacted by a change will have a reaction to that change. And we need to understand that some of those reactions will inhibit the changes we're trying to make. Others will actually make it easier to make changes. The first one is denial. If a change is announced, some people may feel that the change is not necessary. They may be reluctant to listen, or they may deny any facts or information presented that supports the change. Another reaction is resistance. With any change, there will always be people who resist. Resistance is very common and typically stems from a fear of the unknown. Not knowing or understanding how an event is going to turn out can be a scary thought for those who will go through the change. Anger. When change occurs and the norm is uprooted, people can experience anger. They may lash out and become uncooperative during this time. Humans are creatures of habit, and when that changes, they may become angry. Indifference. People just may not care, or the change may not have an impact on their routines or their work. Be wary of this, as the change may be intended to have an impact. If individuals are indifferent, then they may not understand or accept the changes that are being implemented. Acceptance. Changes generally occur for the better and have a positive influence on those involved. Even with positive change, acceptance may not happen right away, but should occur quicker as opposed to when the change is perceived to be negative. Preparing for the change is critically important, and good preparation will improve our chances for a successful change implementation. Some tools we can use include communication. Keeping the lines of communication open before, during, and even after the change is important. We can also use communication to help us learn from this particular change plan so we can use that knowledge for future changes. Education. Part of communication is educating all parties for reasons about why we're changing, what the outcomes will be, why we're doing it. People want to know why a change is occurring. It will also help to stop and clear up any rumors that may have been spread. Training. Make sure all parties are trained and up to date with any and all materials required for the change. A very important step if the change involves adding or removing any pertinent information or resources in your business. Flexibility. When change is planned for, all events cannot be foreseen. Be flexible. Help your team be more flexible and ready to modify or update the current plan to account for unforeseen events. Affected parties. It's especially important to have individuals that are involved in the change participate in the change process. They are likely able to shed light on the subject from an expert's point of view. The tools we discussed will help battle any negative reactions when they occur, and with more preparation, the change will likely be implemented in a fashion that is smoother than might otherwise be possible. Every change begins with a leadership decision. Leaders have to initiate any change effort in order for it to even occur. A critical component of leading and managing change is the formation of a good team that you can communicate with, that you can delegate to, that you can work with in order to make your change successful. And we'll talk about some of those components in terms of leading and managing change in this next section of our webinar. How should the leaders of a change effort prepare and plan for the change? First, begin by putting yourself in a positive frame of mind. You are likely to experience higher than normal levels of stress, and knowing this beforehand will give you the ability to be prepared both mentally and physically. You will be the anchor person and the foundation, and with your steady hand, you can guide your team through the stressful events. You should be a reassuring and active force throughout the whole process. It's impossible to prepare for every contingency. However, planning for the known is a must. Add time or extra room to the schedule for unknowns. When you encounter an unexpected event, your schedule should not be put off by much if you have built in some leeway. It will provide that buffer that gives you and your team the ability to deal with the unknowns and keep rolling with the change process. An important aspect in leading a change effort is delegation. You need to make sure you're surrounding yourself with people that you can delegate to and be confident in their abilities and skills. Be precise and specific with your directions, as when the change process begins, you will be depending on these individuals and their talents. Communicating and providing feedback are the keys to successful delegation. Make sure your team understands this. If the communication fails or there is not accurate feedback, the chances for success are lessened. An issue that sometimes arises when delegating is micromanaging. Keep an eye out not to micromanage, as you can quickly lose track of events and it will take time away from your main duties. Delegating is a skill that takes time, as you must first learn the strengths and weaknesses of your team. You need to know what tasks you can and cannot delegate. It may not be possible to always delegate, but when it can be done, it will provide you with a great resource. Even though we've mentioned communication earlier, we can't discuss it too often. We must keep the lines of communication open. That means we need to be available during the change process. Reassure your team that you are there for them and you are here to provide them with the necessary resources to lead them through the change. Stress to them that you are available and focused on keeping the communication lines open. I want to reiterate that you should always be aware of rumors. They will happen before, during, and after the change. Don't ignore them. Put out honest and clear communication as soon as possible. Reassure your team that if they hear a rumor, to seek out more information from a reliable source. Remind them that spreading rumors doesn't help anyone and typically causes more harm than good. Remember, you cannot over-communicate. Use every tool at your disposal to make sure the lines of communication are open, the communication you're providing is accurate, and that communication is making people understand why we must make the changes that you are putting in place. Remember earlier we talked about resistance and some of the other reactions that people may have to any change. We need to understand that not everyone will agree on any change. Keep in mind that these types of feelings are normal, as people generally do not enjoy change and are sometimes made nervous by it. You will almost certainly encounter pushback and resistance by many team members. Provide facts and data to show them why the change is happening. Reassure them of the need and benefits of the change. These types of individuals are best suited to be educated about the change with information. If you're encountering an extreme case of pushback, provide them with some choices that still fall within the spectrum of the intended change. This should help them feel more involved in the process and alleviate the negative mindset that they may be experiencing. When preparing for change, it's obvious that we want to create situations where we are gaining support. But that process needs to continue throughout the implementation of our change effort. In this section of our webinar, we're going to talk about some of the processes we can use in order to make sure support for the change is in place and is growing. On our journey to gain support, we want to start with gathering data. We want to increase awareness and build desire to support the upcoming change. Your change management team must reach out to the organization at large. The force field analysis developed by German social psychologist Kurt Lewin helps a change management team to identify the pros and cons of options prior to making a decision, explore what is going right and what is going wrong, and to be able to analyze any opposing positions. A significant portion of keeping lines of communication open is addressing concerns and issues. If concerns or issues arise, and they almost certainly will, then steps should be taken to ensure awareness is continually raised and that desire to support the change increases. Strategies that help the change management team responsibly address employees' concerns include engaging employees, providing forums for people to express their questions and concerns, equipping managers and supervisors to become effective change leaders and managers of resistance, orchestrating opportunities for advocates of the change to contact those not yet on board, and finally, aligning incentive and performance management systems to support the change. Please don't get upset when individuals in your organization ask you to address their concerns or issues. That's an opportunity to make adjustments or to provide better or more effective ways of communicating the reasons for that change and why we need to do things a certain way. That's a much better position than having these issues and concerns remain underground. Change is not exempt from Murphy's Law. And even if something isn't going wrong, change management team members must constantly be observing, listening, and evaluating the progress and process during a change. Let's talk about several tools to help the team accomplish this. One is a simple feedback form to gather information from those involved in a change and to help shape the remaining course of the change process. Instead of a paper form, feedback can certainly be obtained through online surveys, in-house questionnaires, questions sent by email, or focus groups. The questions will vary depending on the subject being queried. Many change efforts can be daunting, and the more complex they are, the more difficult it can be to sustain acceleration as we move through the implementation process. In the next portion of this webinar, we will talk about some of the processes that need to be in place in order to make sure employees and other stakeholders continue to be excited about, engaged, and motivated about the changes that we're trying to implement. The leader must make sure that the project and communication during the change process remains on track. They need to identify and explore any issues from employees or stakeholders that have emerged and review and consider any feedback gathered so far. Acting as a facilitator, the leader helps to bring about learning and productivity. Communication will be a byproduct of this by providing indirect or unobtrusive assistance, guidance, and supervision. He or she should listen actively, ask questions, encourage diverse viewpoints, organize information, and help the group reach consensus while understanding that the individual needs of the team members will affect teamwork. The LEAD model provides a simple methodology for facilitating a participative meeting. The L, lead with objectives. When clear objectives are stated up front, group energy is channeled toward achieving an outcome. The objectives shape the content of the meeting. Empower. In the LEAD model, the facilitator is empowered to encourage active participation. Aim for consensus. Getting the team to consensus will have team members more likely to support and carry out the decisions of the team. And finally, directing the process. How the meeting progresses will influence the quality of the discussions of the team and influences the commitment of team members. Leaders must differentiate between process and content. Content includes the topics, subjects, or issues, while process is about how the topics, subjects, or issues are addressed. It is important to celebrate successes along the way of any change process. And the more complex or long-term this change process is, the more important it is to continuously celebrate successes. Communications from managers and supervisors have been shown to have a significant impact on employees during a change initiative. It is important that they are actively involved in celebrating success with employees as a result of positive performance. Celebrations can occur on 3 levels. In a private meeting, a supervisor should attest to the fact that due to the employee's effort, a change was made and how it was succeeding. He or she should extend verbal thanks to the employee. Just a simple, straightforward, one-on-one conversation. Another level is public recognition, where you are officially acknowledging outstanding performance and pointing out one or more role models that help make a successful change occur. Supervisors should carefully consider who receives recognition and not alienate group members who also participated in the change but may not have distinguished themselves as significantly as the individual or individuals that are being recognized. The third level is group celebrations. Fun, engaging activities to celebrate key milestones by a group. Buffet or restaurant lunches, dinner events, group outings at a sport event, an amusement park, or some other cultural event. It's important that these types of celebrations try to include the involvement of the primary change sponsor in some way. In order to sustain the impact of a change, it's important for everyone who is involved in the process to know that results are occurring and understand what those results are. Although we have another webinar dedicated to appreciative inquiry, I wanted to spend a little bit of time during this change webinar to talk about appreciative inquiry and how important it is in terms of making sure people are engaged and excited about the changes that we're trying to make in our organization. So in this next section, we're going to introduce appreciative inquiry and make sure you at least have an introductory understanding to that process. The 4 stages in the appreciative inquiry model are known as the 4D cycle. The first part of the model is discovery, mobilizing the whole system by engaging all stakeholders in your organization in the articulation of strengths and best practices, identifying not what's wrong, but the best of what has been and what is. The second step in that 4D model is dream, creating a clear, results-oriented vision in relation to discover potential and in relation to questions of higher purpose, such as, what does this world call us to become as an organization? The third step in this model is design, creating possibility propositions of the ideal organization, articulating an organization design that is capable of drawing upon and magnifying the positive core to realize the newly expressed dream for our organization. And then the fourth element of this model is strengthening the affirmative capability of the entire system or the entire organization, enabling it to build hope and sustain momentum for ongoing positive change and high performance. When moving through these 4 stages, we want to ask ourselves an affirmative question for our organization. What do we want our organization to look like? What's our vision of what we can and should be as an organization? Once we've answered that question or those questions, we want to consider what possibilities exist that we've not yet considered. What is the smallest change that could make the largest impact? What solutions would create a win for all stakeholders in our organization? These topics emerge from interviews with people throughout the organization in several ways. Preliminary interviews can be held within the organization at different levels. A cross-section of people throughout the organization are engaged in this inquiry. People are challenged in all cases to shift from a deficit mindset or negative mindset into an affirmative or positive mindset in terms of both inquiry and how they respond to questions. So why should we use appreciative inquiry? Well, first, it allows us to get all stakeholders involved in the change process. Employees, customers, vendors, even interested community members. They can all help us understand how to design a more appreciative organization. An organization that can support stakeholders and foster a triple bottom line. People who are more motivated and engaged, who are more productive. It can increase profits, and it can help support a better environment for everyone. This process can serve as a catalyst for the transformation of an organizational culture, one that can help your organization be more successful, more productive, and more inclusive. In this section of our webinar, we're going to talk about an important process called alignment. And part of your change effort should be the process of making sure your employees and other stakeholders are aligned in terms of what you want the organization to look like in the future. Emotion is defined as a state of feeling. And because change in organizations doesn't happen without people, human elements and emotions cannot be downplayed. People, human beings, need certain freedoms in order to support their success, their engagement, their motivation, and their productivity. Freedom to be known in a relationship or inclusiveness. The nature of the appreciative inquiry process leads people to feel encouraged to shine as individuals, not just as someone performing a role. Freedom to be heard. Through the interview process, individuals gain the freedom to be heard. Freedom to dream. People feel more free and in a safe place to share dreams as they dialogue together without judgment. Freedom to choose to contribute. People feel empowered in an appreciative inquiry environment and assume commitments they might not otherwise undertake. Freedom to act with support. The awareness that others care about their work makes individuals comfortable with experimenting with new ideas. Freedom to be positive. Suddenly, the environment validates the fact that it is acceptable to have fun. People feel positive and proud of their work experiences. In any change effort, we need to be armed with facts. A fact is something that is demonstrated to exist or known to have existed. As opposed to the people component, emotion, facts are straightforward and necessary to measure progress. As a change management project shifts into the launch or in-process stage, the change management team must make sure that measurement is ongoing. Let's describe two types of measurements. First, audits and performance measurement systems. Audits and performance measurement systems provide data to determine the adoption of the rate of change. They help to determine how many employees are using the new process or system, the individual or group proficiency levels, who is not engaged in the process or is struggling, and why. Formal, quantitative assessment instruments and a review of performance data provide this information. The results allow the change management and/or project teams to develop and implement corrective actions, make modifications to the program, or to use positive results to propel the project forward. The second type of facts are accountability systems. Enhancements should be made to performance evaluation and compensation systems in order to maintain the accountability and credibility of the change. This is important in order to maintain ongoing reinforcement of the changed systems or processes. Resiliency is the ability to deal with high levels of change while maintaining high productivity in terms of what we're doing today. We need to remember that when we're making changes, especially complex ones, we're asking employees to really manage two types of organizations at the same time until we complete that change. So in this section, we're going to talk about resiliency and how to maintain that resilience throughout and after the change process. Resilience isn't an absolute characteristic. Rather, it is a combination of traits of varying degrees in people. Resilient people, whom psychologist Daryl Conner terms O-type, perceive more opportunity than non-resilient people do. They are more likely to approach life as meaningful and as a guiding beacon through the challenges of change. Their optimistic view lets them see each new day as providing a new set of opportunities and choices. They view disruption as a necessary part of adjusting to the challenges of change. In contrast to O-type individuals, D-types perceive danger. They are individuals who use defense mechanisms such as denial, distortion, and delusions to deflect change, and they are typically more reactive. The opposite O-type individuals are proactive while understanding when to ask for help. When resilient people are confronted with ambiguity, anxiety, and a loss of control that accompanies change, they tend to grow stronger from the experience, rather than allowing themselves to be depleted. Resilient people are more likely to make a quicker and more effective adaptation to change. They are more likely winners rather than losers, and they are critically important in organizations. Resilient people are necessary to foster success during a change. While no person is specifically O-type or D-type, people with O-type characteristics tend to exhibit a high degree of resilience. This allows them to understand that the future contains constantly shifting variables. They display a willingness to explore paradoxes and stay the course during periods of significant disruption. People shift between sides on a resilience continuum, depending upon the characteristics being exhibited and the change being experienced. So here are 5 easy steps for anyone who wants to improve or increase their resilience. First, develop a more positive worldview and self-concept. You do that by noticing what you say to yourself when you are in an unfamiliar situation. Find specific opportunities during challenges you face to be more successful. Practice turning minuses into pluses. Take time out during a period of frustration. Look for a positive person to serve as your coach. 2, maintain a focused sense of purpose for long-term goals and priorities. Explore your value system and identify your personal sense of direction on which you can rely on to make choices. Set new priorities when faced with the disruption of change. 3, use flexible thinking to explore multiple approaches for addressing uncertainty. For instance, switch sides when discussing a topic about which you feel strongly. Rather than assuming your first answer is the solution, suspend judgment if you are in the middle of a change. List 3 positives and 3 negatives about a new idea or concept. And then think about what those positives and negatives mean, and are they accurate or real? Be willing to work in an unfamiliar role in order to learn a different point of view. Identify another person who is a strong, flexible thinker and ask for some coaching. 4. Use organized and structured approaches when managing ambiguity. Learn to quickly sort information and find patterns in new situations. Use a planner or some type of planning software to keep to-do lists, track plans, commitments, and next steps for each change initiative. Break down complex or ambiguous situations into manageable chunks. Find a coach who has strong organizational skills. And 5, experiment proactively with new approaches and solutions. Start with a small project and experiment with a new approach. For a challenge you may be facing, define the worst case scenario and list how you would address each risk. Find someone you perceive as a successful risk taker and discuss your objections and concerns about a change. Try to review a risk associated with a change you are facing as a win-win situation. Determine what you can learn by assuming the risk. And find a coach who excels at proactive experimentation. It's likely you've heard the phrase, "he's stuck in his old ways." Well, we need to make sure that our employees, our organization, doesn't become stuck in our old ways, because that will be one of the reasons our change effort may fail. So in this section of our webinar, we're going to talk about organizational flexibility and how to use it to make sure our change efforts are more likely to be successful. Another important aspect of the change process is flexibility. And there are 2 dimensions of flexibility: flexible thinking and social flexibility. People who think flexibly can generate a broad range of thoughts and possible responses without feeling compelled to decide on one response right away. They have a tolerance for ambiguity plus a high level of creativity. This allows them to tackle a problem from many directions. Flexible thinkers enjoy new or complex ideas, they're open to varying perspectives, and they devise creative solutions in order to adapt to change. At a personal level, people who think flexibly supplement their own knowledge with the talents of other people, knowing that they do not have all of the answers. They are willing to build networks to freely exchange support and information. Social flexibility. People with a great degree of social flexibility have a clear sense of their individual strengths and weaknesses. Their self-concept is not easily threatened as they reach out to others. They're looking for collaboration and working to build these social networks. They have no problem reaching out to see where others can add value and to reach out to ask others for support as needed. Flexible people are more likely to be good team players, and that's a critical need during a change management initiative. Flexibility allows one to brainstorm more efficiently, bringing a wider range of ideas to a project team. The broad range of solutions brought to the table by a flexible thinker encourages a strong change solution while avoiding the potential for inferior solutions that may be generated by people with low levels of social flexibility. The following 5 steps can benefit either a leader or an individual who is dealing with change on a personal or an organizational level. 1. Swap sides in the discussion on a topic about which you feel strongly. Identify colleagues who have a different view than you and ask for their opinions. Then reflect on what you're hearing and ask yourself, do you still feel as strongly about your opinion? 2. Suspend judgment during a change. Don't assume that the first answer is the best or only one. If a colleague presents an idea that seems off base to you, take a step back, reflect, and try to see the rationale from your colleague's point of view. Use appreciative questioning to make sure you understand why they have that view. 3. Practice thinking of paradoxes, both and, rather than contradictions, either or. Try to generate both positives and negatives about any new idea or concept rather than focusing exclusively on one or another. Actively listen to others. Ask colleagues or friends for their opinions about your thoughts regarding a change. Listen completely to their answers and avoid passing judgment on their contributions. 4. Offer to work in a role that's unfamiliar to you so you can approach a situation from a different point of view. Pinpoint a skill that you want to learn and simply ask someone who knows for help on how you can learn that skill. And 5, find someone who is strong in flexible thinking to serve as your coach. Identify someone who is adept with social flexibility and ask for coaching or even mentoring. I'd like to share a couple final thoughts about flexibility and resiliency. You can encourage and support those 2 traits in your organization. You can provide training. You can communicate with your folks the importance of being both flexible and resilient. And as we mentioned already, there are some things that you can do to help support those 2 traits. When we're talking about things like what type of people do we want in our organization? Are we willing to accept different ideas or different points of view from people who, while they're not the same, are hopefully aligned by a vision and mission that has been communicated to all employees? So don't be afraid or unwilling before you start any significant change to really ask yourself and answer the question through analysis: how flexible and how resilient is my organization? And based on the answer to that question, is my organization ready to undertake the challenges that they will face when we start to implement the changes that we need in order to be successful and competitive? I hope this webinar has helped you jumpstart your ability to improve your leadership and management skills with regard to the change process. I also hope you understand how important those soft skills are in order to successfully implement change. We certainly need the technical skills necessary if we're talking about an information technology change or engineering change. But the real power Once you move beyond those hard skills, comes with some of the soft skills: leadership involvement, vision, inspiration and motivation, and of course, communicating and making sure all stakeholders are aware of the reasons and the necessity for any change you're making. Good luck in your change management efforts in the future, and remember, as always, I see you.